Thank you, Praveen. Good afternoon, everyone. Are you ready? First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Govil sir for giving me this opportunity. The topic given to me is drowning, with special emphasis on water versus freshwater drowning. Every year, drowning accounts for at least 500,000 deaths worldwide. And let me tell you, this is only the tip of the iceberg, as most of the non-fatal drowning cases go unreported, okay, and unnoticed. They are not reported to any authority. The highest rates for fatal drowning are from the low and middle economy, income countries, third world countries, and over 90% of such fatalities are there from these countries. Drowning is one of the major causes of accidental deaths, especially under the age of 45 years, because of the risk-taking behavior while doing some activities in and around the water bodies, and the children under 5 years of age because of unsupervised activities around pools and all the other areas. The age distribution of submersion injury, the other name for drowning, is bimodal. The first peak is at less than 5 years of age because of the fact that the kids are, they are not looked after well when they are in and around the, pools. A lot of bathtub culture is there. So any kid who is left unsupervised may have this, accident. The other age, the other peak is at 15 to 25 years of age because of the lot of adventurous activities they want to do in the swimming pool, diving, water surfing, a lot of activities. So because of all these, facts, this is the age group which is the second most hit. Now the statistics, if we talk of for non-fatal drowning, it is very difficult to obtain. Because as I told you, a lot of it will go unreported and unnoticed. And actually it may occur several hundred times as frequently as reported drowning deaths. So here we'll deal this subset, non-fatal drowning, management of non-fatal drowning victims, okay? We will not talk of deaths, huh? So this is the age standardized disability adjusted life years rate for drowning. Okay. So what is DALI rates? Can anyone tell me? This is the overall impact, or you can say a measure of the disease burden on the country, and it is estimated by counting the number of years that are lost because of ill health, because of the early mortality, or because of the disabilities in that society. And these are the countries which have the highest rates. And can you see these African countries are affected the most, and amongst those Somalia is at the top for the obvious reasons that they have to learn and do a lot of activities in the sea. They are one of the best sea pirates in the world. So this country produces a lot of sea pirates, so they are quite adventurous. If we talk of the terminology, there have been multiple definitions of drowning, non-fatal drowning, and submersion injuries, and they all have created a lot of confusion. So to clear this confusion, in 2010, AHA resuscitation guidelines have recommended to use Utstein type of methods and classification. But for all practical purposes, non-fatal drowning should be defined as survival at least temporarily after aspiration of fluid into the lungs, which can be referred to as wet non-fatal drowning, or after a period of asphyxia secondary to laryngospasm, which is known as dry non-fatal drowning. So I was talking of this Utstein definitions. Basically, Utstein is a place in the Norway. So in 1990, a lot of societies like European Society of Cardiology, European Society of Anesthesiology or Critical Care, and all the other important societies, they met at that place to formulate some guidelines and definitions for different disease states. Okay, and they also devised some methods and the formats to report the diseases and to so as to have a uniformity of data worldwide if we want to compare it. So that is what Utstein definitions and guidelines are, and they included this drowning also. So so the AHA has recommended this Utstein methods and templates of data reporting for drowning and related events to improve the consistency of recording. Now, as per these guidelines, drowning refers to a process resulting in primary respiratory impairment from submersion or immersion in a liquid medium. What is the difference between submersion or immersion? Submersion is when the level of airway is below the level of water, and immersion is when you have splashes of water over the face and the airways above the water. They also suggested to remove the ambiguous or confusing terms such as near drowning, secondary drowning, wet drowning. All these they made it redundant actually. What are the risk factors? First of all, inadequate adult supervision as far as kids are concerned, inability to swim or overestimation of anyone's capabilities, overconfidence. It's always a dangerous thing. Then risk-taking behavior, use of alcohol, illicit drugs, quite common and increasing day by day. And the use of alcohol has been associated with more than 50% cases of drowning, if we adult drowning, and more than 70 to 75% of boat drowning. So alcohol has been associated with this. Hypothermia, because it can very well precipitate a lot of arrhythmias and acidosis, a lot of problems. Concomitant trauma, stroke or MI. Then seizure disorders or developmental behavioral disorders in children. These are also a very important risk factor. Then undetected primary cardiac arrhythmias, in some patients where the drowning is not explainable. So in those cases, some of the cases, it has been seen that these patients were having abnormalities or mutation in the ryanodine receptor, making them prone to having polymorphic ventricular tachycardias. Okay, so those are the risk factors. And then you have congenital long QT syndrome patients, where when they are exposed to cold conditions or cold water or exposed to exercise, they develop these arrhythmias. Okay, and they can drown themselves. Then hyperventilation prior to shallow dive, which is commonly seen in professional divers and swimmers. What they do to increase their capability of being underwater, they try to hyperventilate so as to increase the oxygen. But what happens that PaCO2 levels goes down and the oxygen content is increased not that much. So whenever they dive or do the swimming aggressively, the PaO2 levels fall to 30 to 40 mmHg before the PaCO2 level sufficiently rises to trigger the breath. So what happens? They have cerebral hypoxia and the unconsciousness, and they can drown. These are the causes again: fresh water versus salt water. Freshwater drowning accounts for 98% of all drowning cases, and salt water only 1 to 2%. And these are the statistics for the freshwater drowning. Coming to pathophysiology, fatal and non-fatal drowning both will begin with a period of panic, loss of normal breathing pattern, breath holding. So basically there is a struggle to remain above the water. All the victims are struggling to remain above the water and to have a voluntary breath holding. Okay, once that is offset, there is reflex inspiratory effort, which will lead to the entry of water inside the trachea by means of either aspiration or laryngospasm. When the laryngospasm is the predominant thing, it is commonly known as dry drowning, which accounts for around 15 to 20% of the cases. If the aspiration of water is too much, maybe around 20% of the cases, this is referred to as wet drowning. But again, we will not use these terms in further discussion. And this is the terminal event. For every type of drowning you see, it affects every organ system, especially brain. And the most of the morbidity and mortality of drowning is basically because of the cerebral hypoxia. Now this can be divided into two parts, pathophysiology if we talk. Part 1, as I told you, there is a voluntary breath holding so as to keep the water away from the airway. This is a normal reflex. There is aspiration of small amounts of larynx causing involuntary intense laryngospasm leading to hypoxia. Once this hypoxia is there, there is abatement of the laryngospasm reflex, and there is swallowing of a large amount, aspiration of a large amount of water and aspiration into the lungs. Because of this, there is hypoxia, decrease in the saturation. Because of hypoxia, a lot of cardiac arrhythmias are there, a lot of problems are there. So there is decrease in the cardiac output. There is intense peripheral vasoconstriction because of the sympathetic outburst. There is hypothermia, bradycardia, and circulatory arrest, which is the final culminating event. If we talk of specifically of salt versus freshwater pathophysiology, so previously in in literature a lot of things were there to have a distinction between salt water and freshwater drowning, but subsequently a lot of researchers have proved that basically there is no major difference if we think of the pathophysiology or the management part of both the drowning cases. The reason we'll see. So so it was thought that if the victim is drowned in the salt water, so what will happen? A lot of plasma, because of the osmotic gradient, a lot of plasma will come into the pulmonary interstitial space and will cause a lot of pulmonary edema, and the serum will become hypertonic. That was the thought behind salt water. And what they used to be the thought behind freshwater drowning was that because of the hypotonic nature of the water inside the lung, a lot of water will go into the intravascular space, leading to hypervolemia and dilutional dyselectrolytemia. So that was the basic concept, which has been proved to be wrong in later researches, and it has been found more apparent among persons who were dead, not in non-fatal drowning victims. Okay, is it clear? The reason was that aspiration of at least 11 ml per kg of water is must before any blood volume changes happens, and at least more than 22 ml before electrolyte changes. And it is very unusual and rare that the drowning victims will aspirate more than 3 to 4 ml per kg of the water. So this is the maximum limit. That's why this difference is there in the dead victims. So what happens, either you talk of the salt water or fresh water, both will cause the washout effect of the surfactant. There will be loss of surfactant, there will be damage to the alveolo-capillary membrane. Okay, there will be problems in the VQ mismatch, same problems in the compliance, so everything will be same, and the management will also be same. Okay. So coming to end organ effects, this is the final culminating event of every drowning victim. So we'll take up important organs, organ systems one by one. If we talk of pulmonary, there is obviously fluid aspiration leading to hypoxemia. Both of these, as we have already discussed, will lead to the same problems, that is ALI and ARDS. There will be insufficiency at the pulmonary level leading to shortness of breath, crackles and wheezing. Chest radiograph or CT can vary from normal picture to localized perihilar or diffuse pulmonary edema. If we talk of the CNS, the hypoxia and ischemia is the final event leading to neuronal damage, cerebral edema and elevations in ICP. 20% of non-fatal drowning victims, they sustain one or the other kind of neurological damage, which is mostly permanent and leads to a lot of neurological disabilities. Okay, so that is important. Cardiovascular, a lot of arrhythmias because of hypothermia or because of other problems which are there. In some patients, you may find in the ER the ECG showing the signs of MI. Now that may be because of some kind of sympathetic outburst leading to Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy? You must read. Okay. That may be because of the coronary vasospasm, or maybe MI per se. So do not overlook the ECG in drowning patients. Initial arrhythmias may be from sinus tachycardia, bradycardia and fibrillation, and believe me, giving oxygen and reversing the hypoxia is the only treatment required in these patients. Again, diving can precipitate a lot of fatal arrhythmias, as we have already discussed. Acid-base balance, most of the patients will show metabolic and respiratory acidosis. There won't be any major electrolyte imbalances. Okay, except if the victim has drowned in the Dead Sea. You have heard of Dead Sea? It's near the border of Jordan and Israel. So it has no life. That's why it is known as Dead Sea. It is a very concentrated water. And when someone drowns in it, someone has to be really stoned by some, drug or alcohol to drown in this. Otherwise, it is very easy to, float in this water. So they will have extreme levels of sodium, calcium, and magnesium in their blood. So unless you drown in sea water, there won't be any major electrolyte imbalances. Renal is rare only because of the ATN, because of hypoxemia, shock, hemoglobinuria or myoglobinuria. Coagulation, again, coagulation failure is very uncommon. If we talk of the management, it can be divided into 4 parts. First is pre-hospital care and acute interventions. Second is ED management. Third is how you dispose the patient or the patient disposition, and the last is the inpatient management. If we talk of pre-hospital care, rescue the patient as soon as possible, but please do not risk yourself or the safety of the rescuer. Here is very, very important, is of paramount importance. You are not supposed to dive into the water. Please use rope or some flotation device which has been given at that place to rescue the victim. And as soon as the victim is in the shallow water or on the hard surface, you start the resuscitation. Okay. CPR again as soon as possible. Okay, you have to see the safety of the the victim as well as the rescuer. Ventilation is the most important initial treatment. The main difference in resuscitation in drowning, vis-a-vis other causes, is that you follow ABC, not CAB, because asphyxia is the main cause of cardiac arrest here. Okay, so you follow ABC, and European Resuscitation Council, they have recommended 5 rescue breaths initially, because 2 or 3 breaths might not suffice because of the fact that these patients will have a lot of water in the airway. Cervical spinal cord injury is again very, very uncommon, maybe less than 0.5% as per the data. And unless you have some concerning history, or on examination you find some signs of cervical injury, or you have history of diving into a shallow water, or some water adventures, water sport, drowning followed by, or RTA followed by drowning, in all those cases, the cervical spine stabilization should be there. Otherwise, it is not a routine recommendation from ACLS also. Pulses may be very weak here and difficult to palpate, because these patients are having lot of hypothermia and lot of arrhythmias also, like sinus tachycardia or AF. So you might not be able to feel the pulse. So please give at least 1 minute. That is what it is recommended. 1 minute before initiating chest compressions. So again, compression only CPR. COCPR is not recommended in drowning victims. The Heimlich maneuver or other postural, drainage technique, they are very helpful in movies, not in the real life. In movies you see, some kind of thirst being given, and they wake up after 2 or 3, hiccups. So that won't work in real life. So please don't delay rescue breaths, because that will increase the chances of regurgitation and aspiration all the more. Give oxygen and initiate rewarming the patient. This is once you have the patient in the ER, you have to assess and manage the ABCs as in all other cases. This slide I have put deliberately so as to make you understand the importance of ABCs and the initial patient management. Any patient you receive in the ER or ICU, these are the basic steps. Okay, so please don't follow these steps. Don't forget these steps. Give oxygen, apply some monitors. Okay, send some investigations. Observe the patient and manage the associated problems like hypothermia, the arrhythmias and hypoxia. So whatever pre-hospital resuscitative efforts you have continued, you have to continue it in the ER also. There are some indications for NIV, some indications of intubation. Most of the patients will have will benefit from the simple oxygen therapy. Some will be requiring NIV. And when you have deterioration in the neurological status, when you have patients who are not able to maintain the airway, you might like to go for the intubation. And depending on the hypoxia, hypercarbia, all those indications which we routinely see in the ICU, you are going to intubate the patient. Again, put orogastric tube. It is very, very important, because these patients are very high risk patients for having regurgitation and aspiration. Okay, if you are not using CPR, the data is saying that it is around 50% chance. And if you are doing CPR in drowning patients, the chances of regurgitation and aspiration are more than 80%. So please decompress the stomach. Frequent vital sign measurement and clinical assessment, reassessment, because these patients especially will require the continuity of care, and the situation here is dynamic, so you need to monitor these patients very closely. The trauma evaluation and appropriate imaging studies as per the history and the examination of the patient you might to get. Rewarm the hypothermic patients. Again, you can have active and passive external rewarming techniques. You have active internal core rewarming techniques. Nowadays you have latest things like endovascular catheter placement or extracorporeal methods of rewarming. All this will be taken in some other class. Okay, so this is very important. Then importance of prolonged resuscitative efforts in some subset of patients where the hypothermia has been there. Okay, so in that case you are supposed to rewarm the patient and continue the resuscitative efforts till the temperature is 32 to 34 degrees Celsius. Now this is how you do the patient disposition. This I have taken from BMJ best practice guidelines for Browning classification system. So you have to check the response of the patient. Once the response is there, you have to do the pulmonary auscultation. You can have normal pulmonary auscultation or abnormal. If the pulmonary auscultation is normal, these victims are known as rescue. That means no aspiration of water has been there, so they are put there and no medical intervention is required. Once there is wet cough, these are put in grade 1. Okay, and again no major medical attention is required. From grade 3 to 6, can you see, from grade 3 to 6 these patients will be managed in the ICU. Okay, so depending on the on the hemodynamic status, these may be divided into grade 3 or 4. The patients who have had rails on pulmonary auscultation, grade 3 patients will mostly require the endotracheal intubation, mechanical ventilation, okay, and continuous monitoring. Grade 5, when the patient is unresponsive, they can be from grade 5 to dead. Okay, grade 5 is when pulse is present, so you have to do the CPR and follow the other management protocols. If the pulse was absent and there was no obvious physical evidence of death, these were the patients in grade 6. You have to start CPR and follow the standard protocols. Okay, and for dead patients, you have to shift the patients to mortuary for further management. Forensic. If we talk of the inpatient management, respiratory, there is no major difference if we talk of ventilation in drowning patients versus non-drowning patients. All the patients who are having ALI or ARDS, the same ventilatory strategies will be followed here. Bronchospasm, again beta 2 agonist, most of the patients will be benefited with this. Steroids have shown no benefit in any study in drowning patients. The only help you can achieve or have with the help of steroid is to relief of bronchospasm. If the beta 2 agonist did not work, bronchoscopy, again no specific indication of bronchoscopy in such patients. Only when you are suspecting some kind of sludge or some big particles inside the air, you can go for it. There is no role of prophylactic antibiotic unless. Is there any confusion? Why are you talking? You can ask. There is no role of prophylactic antibiotics in such patients unless these patients have been rescued from the contaminated water. And there also you have to keep in mind what are the commonly encountered waterborne bugs like Pseudomonas, Aeromonas, Proteus. You have to keep that thing in mind. Then a lot of researchers have gone into use of surfactant in drowning patients, keeping in mind that there is a loss of surfactant. So if you give surfactant, these patients will suffice. But again, there has been no benefit which has been seen with the researchers. You have to restore the adequate oxygen delivery to tissue by making the cardiovascular system stable. There is a hypotension in this patient, a lot of hypovolemia, hypotension. Now the reason is cold diuresis. What happens that because of the intense peripheral vasospasm, there is shifting of blood from the peripheries to the core, and the central volume receptors will sense it as if there is fluid overload in the body, and there is decrease in the production of ADH, leading to a lot of diuresis. So replacing adequate amount of fluid is of paramount importance in these patients. We talk of the neurological. The two most important factors which govern the outcome in such patients is GCS on presentation and the duration of loss of consciousness. These are two most important things. All the efforts and the treatment strategies are to prevent secondary neurological injuries. Routine brain CT is not recommended again unless you have some important history or concerning evidence, or unless you are suspecting TBI. ICP monitoring again in these subset of patients not routinely recommended. Mild hyperventilation, you may go for it when you are having patients at high risk of cerebral herniation. In that case, as a stopgap measure or rescue therapy, you can give hyperventilation for some time. Osmotherapy again not indicated, and steroids have shown no proven benefit. So please do not use steroids in these cases for any reason. Any kind of shivering, activity or seizure is of grave consequences to those patients, because the CMRO2 is increased. Any kind of electrical or metabolic activity will decrease the chances of good neurological outcomes. So you have to treat these patients aggressively. Hypothermia and barbiturated coma, again it is highly controversial and it is unlikely to benefit the patient if you go by the evidence. You have to avoid NMDs. So you have to maintain the patient in a normal state, like you have to maintain normoglycemia, normothermia, normoxia, normocarbia. All things should be in a normal range. Nothing, no rocket science in managing these patients. So if you talk of therapeutic induced hypothermia in post resuscitation period, again it has been shown that the data is very poor and equivocal. And there have been a lot of case studies where it has shown some benefit. A lot of other studies have shown that there is no outcome benefit. So it is reasonable to use it or not to use it as per your wish. Okay. So there is no recommendation as far as this is concerned. If we talk of prognosis, this I have taken from one of the largest case control studies to date in drowning victims, and they have included more than 1,000, maybe 1,100 patients. And these were the predictors of poor outcome they have come out with. If the age is more than 14 years, submersion time is more than 5 minutes, time to effective BLS was more than 10 minutes, serum pH on presentation was less than 7.1, time of CPR was quite high, the initial core temperature was less than 33 degrees Celsius, patient was comatose, and they have also found out that there was no association between water temperature and the outcome. So we think that if the victim is drowned in the cold water, the chances of recovery are more, but that is not the fact actually. This is again one table showing the factors associated with death after submersion incidents. As you can see, they have done the grading, and the findings were from normal lung examination to abnormal lung examination to cardiac arrest. And as the grading is increasing, the mortality rate is increasing sharply. This is again from the same study. This is a correlation of submersion time with the fatality. So when the submersion time was 0 to 5 minutes, 10% fatality, 6 to 9 minutes, 56%. If it is more than 25 minutes, the fatality goes to the tune of 100%. Something about neurological prognosis. So absence of spontaneous respiration, poor GCS on presentation, and prolonged loss of consciousness are ominous signs associated with severe neurological sequelae. Permanent neurological sequelae persist in around 20% of all the victims who present comatose, and this can vary, or if you can say the spectrum of these disabilities vary from minimal brain dysfunction to lot of peripheral neurological damage. A lot of patients will come to you with quadriplegia, extrapyramidal symptoms, and the quality of life in these patients will be compromised. Now some safety recommendations. Never leave a child alone in or near water, even for a minute. Even if a vessel is there containing water, you should keep track of the child. You have to limit pool access. As I was preparing this presentation, I went through a study where they have said that if all the swimming pools can be fenced in and there are self-closing and self-latched doors, the chances of drowning accidents can go decrease by 80%. So that is one thing I was amazed to see, but nowhere I see these safety recommendations to be followed. Children with epilepsy, special cases. So you have to, you know, you are not supposed to leave these childs unattended. Only with lifeguard supervised swimming pools they are allowed to swim. You know, the bathrooms should be left unlocked, and supervision is the key in these patients. Everyone should learn CPR, use approved personal flotation devices, and society in large should be taught safe water behavior, which is very poor in our country at least. So the best approach there is 3P: prevention, prevention, and prevention. This is the only key. Now to summarize my presentation, ventilation is the most important initial treatment for victims of submersible injury. Ventilation strategies are standard as in all other cases. Rescue breathing should begin as soon as the rescuer reaches shallow water or stable surface. In critically ill patients, standard practices are employed to reduce the risk of brain injury. The role of therapeutic hypothermia remains unclear, and there is no good evidence to support the routine use of glucocorticoids or prophylactic antibiotics in non-fatal drowning victims. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So now we discuss for a 20-minute tea break.